Do any of you remember the old time radio show, Lights Out? Spooky old radio show back from the 40s. I think it was even a TV show in the 50s maybe. It was a kind of a scary show, and there would be gong like boom, boom. It is later than you think. Lights out! Turn your lights out, everyone. And then they'd have some spooky, scary story to listen to. Well, that came to me last night. I didn't actually title this because of that, but I remembered it, and I listened to a couple of those scary episodes last night. I didn't sleep real well. But it sort of fits. It's almost prophetic in a way, and so this really fits. And Lights Out is going to be one of the main signs that we shall see, and we read about that. We'll get to it in a minute. But last time we read through Matthew chapter 24, which I said was very much like what we just read from Mark 13. It was discussing the falling away of believers and the coming tribulation. I'm going to put up this poster once again so that we can refer to it during the message, because there are a few things that will be going on that I just want to point to today. And last time we heard the words of Jesus, who said, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, then shall be great tribulation." And we've talked about that a couple of times before. We also mentioned that there are several anchor points within this whole sequence of end time events that help us figure out what to watch for and when. Anchor points provided by Jesus and Daniel provide immovable reference points that help us to know when things are going to happen. And from Daniel chapter 9, we know that there is an anchor point when the treaty is made to rebuild the temple. That's the first thing we should watch for. And that will start that 70th week of Daniel that we talk about, this final 7-year period here, which includes the great falling away and the great tribulation there before the rapture of believers at the day of Christ. And there's that anchor point in the middle, the time that was just mentioned, the abomination of desolation, when the Antichrist breaks the treaty and desolates the temple. That's right here, and we can calculate things that'll be happening from that point on. And you see, once the Antichrist desolates that new temple, either with an unclean sacrifice or maybe an idol to himself, then the Jews and many Christians finally will realize this guy is not the Messiah that they've been waiting for thousands of years. And Antichrist's act of defiance and idolatry against God is the sign that the second half of that 70th week of Daniel is beginning, which is technically where the Great Tribulation actually begins. Then you can count off 1,260 days until the Lord returns at the day of Christ. Well, wait a minute. 1,260 days? We can't know that, can we? I mean, didn't we just read and hear Jesus say, "But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father"? Yes, but obviously Jesus said this about himself not knowing while he was on earth in the form of a man, and he had set aside some of his heavenly powers during his earthly stay. He humbled himself greatly in the form of a man, and it talks about that in Philippians chapter 2. But once he rose from the dead and ascended back to heaven, things changed. and he certainly knows the day and the hour now. We do not know the day and the hour, but we do know what to watch for, and that's the key. And as these anchor points occur, when we see them happen, then we can begin to figure it out, if we know what the Bible tells us. Revelation chapter 13, 5-7 says, "And there was given unto him," Antichrist, "a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies." Sounds like what we read in Daniel 7. "And power was given to him to continue 42 months. That's 3.5 years, or 1,260 days, based on their 30-day calendar, which is the last half of those 7 years. "And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them." Sounds again like what we read in Daniel chapter 7. Jesus also mentions this 42 months of tribulation in Revelation 11. And the desolation of the temple goes on for 2,300 days, as we read before in Daniel chapter 8. And that's 1,040 days past the 1,260 days that he's given power over the saints. And any surviving saints are raptured out after 1,260 days, and he no longer has that power over the saints. So again, when that happens, the desolation of the temple, that will happen for 2,300 days. But after the 1,260 days will be the day of Christ, when the rapture will happen. And the temple will still remain desolated for another 1,040 days after that. That will be the time of wrath. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more. But the day of the Lord begins with a time of wrath, and it starts at the beginning of those additional 1,040 days there. And God will take that time to subdue all things to himself. We talked last time about millions of people falling away from the faith during times of terrible trial, persecution, and hardship. Well, the tribulation time either follows that or continues it for believers. It all takes place during those 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel there. And the focus of attention during the tribulation time seems to be mostly in Israel. That's what's mostly be talking about. The saints really are not mentioned much in the various passages that directly refer to the tribulation, other than the verses we mentioned the last time, which pretty much prove we will still be here during that time. And during this tribulation, life will be mostly normal for those who receive the mark of the beast and who go along with the Antichrist, as it was in the days of Noah. It'll only be those who don't accept the mark or who won't cooperate with the system who will be arrested and imprisoned and killed. But Jesus told us to endure. Just look what happened last century when those who went along with Hitler and reported any Jews that were hiding, or reported anyone who was hiding Jews. They went along with the system. They had a good life, safe and secure, so they thought, for a few years anyway. But one of the biggest mistakes that people make in this discussion about the timing of the rapture, when it is not distinguishing between the tribulation and wrath. See, tribulation is what the world does to us. And wrath is what God does to the world. And the last 3.5 years of the 70th week is the Great Tribulation. It's not the time of wrath. That comes after. Tribulation is mentioned 5 times in Revelation, all of them referring to the time before the 6th seal is opened. And last time we read from Revelation chapter 6, read about the first 5 seals being opened and those horsemen of the apocalypse each being released. That was before. The wrath is mentioned 13 times after the 6th seal is opened and we are gone. And the wrath comes later, as we will see. And somewhere in the middle of this time of great tribulation is when God sends 2 witnesses to begin their ministry in Jerusalem. And apparently they train the next generation of 144,000 Jewish men to carry on the work of spreading the truth, starting right after the rapture. And we'll learn a little bit more about that next time too. But I say that they'll appear in the middle of this time because 1,260 days later, they are killed after the 5th trumpet. And they must come before the rapture because the world would be without a gospel witness if they were not on the job. See, God is not willing that any should perish. And he will be sure that there is always someone telling the truth and representing him here on earth, even through the worst days of wrath. Elijah thought he was the only one left. And God told him that he still had 7,000 others who had not bowed the knee to Baal. And Elijah may be one of those 2 witnesses. The prophet Malachi said, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." That's one of the few unfulfilled prophecies left. Which brings us to the next big anchor point. Maybe the biggest one so far. The sun and the moon will go dark. Lights out. That's why I named this message, Lights Out. Everybody is going to know that. See, the sun and the moon going dark happens on the day of Christ, right here. 1,260 days after that desolation starts. It's also the day of the rapture, and it's the end of the tribulation. Some people say, well, the sun and the moon going dark, that's just a metaphor. It's an allegory. That's not really going to happen. Well, it's mentioned all over the place in the Bible. There's at least 12 references to it. And I'm going to read them quickly here. From Isaiah 13, we just read this. "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." Isaiah 24, he says again, "Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion, and in Jerusalem, and before his ancients gloriously." The prophet Ezekiel from chapter 32 said, "And when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven, and make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light." The prophet Joel mentions it 3 times in chapter 2. He says, "Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble. for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains. A great people and a strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. He also says, the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and the terrible day of the Lord come. The prophet Amos said, and it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord God, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day. We read last week from Matthew 24, Jesus said, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. In Mark, Jesus said, but in those days after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then again, the parallel passage in Luke 21 says, and there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. From the book of Acts, chapter 2, the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Lord come. And Revelation chapter 6, after those first 5 seals that we read about last week, says, and I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. The Bible says the sun and the moon are going to go dark on the day of the Lord. On the day of Christ. Which brings me to that mistake I just made, is one that many people make. See, there are 2 separate days to keep straight, because they are not the same. They are the day of Christ and the day of the Lord. The day of Christ is the day that the sun and the moon go dark. And it's the day of the rapture, which happens before the day of the Lord. And you see, many Bible versions confuse the day of Christ with the day of the Lord, which comes later. That's one reason I did that. See, the King James Bible appears to get this right, and that's why I've been using it for one reason. The day of the Lord begins the time of wrath and continues into the blessed time of God's kingdom and Christ's 1,000-year millennial reign here on earth. Because, see, there are actually 2 parts of the second coming of Christ. It happens in 2 phases at 2 different times. In Acts 1, the 2 men in white, probably angels, told the disciples, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. He went up in a cloud, and he will come back in a cloud. Going back to the first Advent, he came as a baby in a manger. This time he comes as a king with power and glory. And his appearing is what believers have looked for and longed for and prayed for 2,000 years now. Actually, as I said, there are two distinct parts to his second coming, as we will see. In his first appearance, often called his appearing, he just comes down to the clouds to call up his bride. Then, about 3 years later, after the 1040 days of wrath, he returns on a white horse and comes all the way down to the Mount of Olives to defeat Satan and his armies at Armageddon and take the throne of David in Jerusalem. And this is usually called the Second Advent. And that's here, coming on white horses, Christ's return, Battle of Armageddon, after the day of the Lord and the time of wrath. So there's two distinct parts to his second coming. And we'll speak a little bit more on that another time soon when we discuss the return of Christ. But the day of his appearing, the first of those two, is called the day of Christ. And it's the day that we can rejoice, because then we are made perfect, and he finishes his work in us. And it's going to be a very busy day. There's a lot of details about what will happen on that day. I'm going to go through them a little bit next week. But to sum it up, the day of Christ is the day that we rejoice, because he finishes his work in us that he began in us. It's the day that Jesus is revealed to the whole world. It comes like lightning, it says in Luke 17. It begins with the sun and moon going dark and an earthquake after the tribulation. And that ought to get everybody's attention. I mean, even blind or sleeping people will sit up and pay attention when that goes on. You know, I was thinking about it, and that'll be like the grandest big entrance ever. You know, Hollywood tries to make their stars look big and important with special effects and grand entrances, fireworks and noise as they come on stage, but wait till Jesus comes. Everyone will stop in what they're doing and look up, like we saw in that video. That's why I wanted to show it. I think that's going to be like that. His entrance will be seen by everyone worldwide. That's his appearing, his first of those two appearances. And then an angel blows a trumpet, and any Christians who survived the Great Tribulation are caught up or gathered together in an event commonly called the Rapture. And you know, from Jesus' question in Luke 18 that we talked about last time, it sure seems that there might not be many left alive to be caught up. And that's just kind of the hard truth. Remember, he comes back and, well, he said, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find any faith on earth? People will be falling away during that preceding time. We shall see. He tells us to stay faithful even unto death. But because it is the day we rejoice, he appears and we are made like him on that day. He confirms us until this day. And that is the day that the Spirit is saved. It's the day we are gathered together to him after the great falling away, after the man of sin is revealed. The day of Christ is the day of the rapture. That means the falling away, where many followers leave Jesus, comes during that 7-year time that is commonly called the tribulation. Really, the great falling away starts, and the great tribulation is the second half of it. But The Great Tribulation is often used as the reference to refer to all of it. But the rapture is post-tribulation, happens after the tribulation, but before the wrath. So it's post-trib, but pre-wrath. And the Bible tells us that even if we are persecuted or even killed, we can rejoice in the fact that God has great rewards for us. You can read about that in 2 Timothy. It says, "Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. And if we suffer, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he also will deny us." So be forewarned. We are to persevere. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on here is sort of the elephant in the room, if you could say. We sort of touched on it before, but I wanted to make it clear. What about imminency? Because by far the major doctrine that pre-tribulation rapture believers cling to for support for their position, which is what I used to think, is that the idea that Jesus could come at any moment. It could happen now. It could happen tonight. And this is called the doctrine of imminency. See, pre-tribbers argue that there is nothing that needs to happen before Jesus comes back, since Jesus told his disciples to watch, to be ready, to wait for his coming, and to look for that blessed hope. You know, our Christian songbooks and hymnals contain many songs that teach that Jesus could come at any moment, including songs we've sung recently, like "What If It Were Today?" and "Soon and Very Soon." Some of those wonderful songs we like to sing. It is true that the Bible tells us to expect the Lord's coming, but that does not translate to imminency. See, I can watch for and wait for and be ready for and look for and expect my wedding day, my anniversary, or any great event. That doesn't change the fact that it cannot happen at any moment without warning. See? And I mentioned before that Paul said clearly that the day of Christ cannot come until there is a great falling away and the man of sin is revealed. And as we have found in our study so far, those things are yet to come. And we've been learning how to watch for them. Peter certainly did not think or teach the Lord's return was imminent. Jesus had told him he would grow old before he died. You can read that in John 21. So Jesus' return could not have happened before Peter grew old. It was not imminent then. So this would mean that Peter's epistles could not teach imminency. See, Peter wrote his last letter about 67 AD. He had not grown old and died yet. And any other New Testament books written before that time, like the 4 Gospels, Acts, the writings of Paul and James, could not teach imminency either, because Peter knew he was still going to live till he got old and died. And you know, as much as I wish the rapture was imminent, all the clues say he is not coming until certain things are yet fulfilled. And Peter knew that Jesus' coming was not imminent. Peter trusted Jesus' words to him and knew he couldn't and wouldn't die till he was old. In Acts 12, we read how he was sleeping peacefully between the 2 soldiers after his friend James had just been killed, and they told him that he was next. See, he knew Jesus had promised he would grow old, so he didn't worry. Paul did not teach imminency. We read in Acts 23 that Paul was in Jerusalem causing a riot when the Lord told him to be of good cheer, since he would get to testify of Jesus in Rome. So Jesus could not have returned until Paul made it to Rome. So Paul could be calm on that storm-tossed ship that crashed, since he knew he would make it to Rome. He had the Lord's promise. So the return of Christ was not imminent then. And the Lord told the Apostle John on the island of Patmos that he would prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. That's mentioned in Revelation 10. So John did not expect the imminent return of Christ. He knew he had to get off the island and do all those things before the Lord returned. John did not believe in imminency. And since Revelation is the last book written for the New Testament, around 96 AD, and it could not teach imminency because there was prophecy that he still had to do some things after he finished that, there's no way that any other book in the New Testament could really teach that either. And I mentioned why Peter and Paul couldn't have. See, I would love nothing more than for the Lord to come and rapture us all out of here now, today. It would be wonderful. But I've looked for and longed for and waited for that blessed day of hope since I became saved, and I thought it was going to happen sooner. But my current understanding now is that I will have to be here for the time of tribulation. And that only motivates me to work harder for the Lord before the bad times come. To try to help other people see that and during that time as well. I do not look forward to suffering. Like the evangelist Dave Reaver said, I hate pain. Pain hurts me. I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to be hurt. Pretending we will get raptured out before, and preaching it loud and long like so many do, and singing songs about it does not change the scriptures any more than Jeremiah's contemporaries changed the fact of the coming captivity by saying it would not happen. It did. So I suggest just get it settled in your hearts. We, the church, will almost surely be here through the painful falling away process and throughout the Great Tribulation. The world will need us. That's why. See, God needs us here on earth during this terrible time to be a witness for Him and to get more souls saved. Those who are faithful unto death will be well rewarded, though. We can rest assured of that. Those who are faithful will be well rewarded. It tells us in Revelation that we will get victory, a crown of life, hidden manna, a white stone, a new name, power over the nations. We'll get white raiment. You'll get your name in the book of life. You will not be hurt of the second death. You will be confessed before God and angels, and you will inherit all things with the angels. Revelation 21 says, He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. We watched the Super Bowl a couple of weeks ago, and we saw pro football players try to run 100 yards with a ball, while a bunch of other huge guys try to stop them and stomp on them and hurt them. And they do it Because they get paid very well. That's why they do that. They get a lot of glory and they reap huge rewards. Huge rewards of an earthly type. But I have to ask you, do you really believe God's promises about rewards for the martyrs? Because that's what we have to look forward to the most. The first century Christians absolutely believed that. The Romans were amazed at how eager they were to die for their faith. They'd never seen people act like that. Right now, though, tens of thousands of Christians are dying in other places, in communist and Muslim and Hindu countries all over the world. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to suffer for the Lord? Try to tell them that the rapture is going to come before they have to suffer. They're already suffering now. And we will find out. But after he comes to get his bride, the church, at the rapture, believers will go to the judgment seat of Christ. Here's the day of Christ, when the sun and the moon go dark, the rapture happens, and we go up to the judgment seat of Christ right there. And you see, that is when we will be judged and we will receive rewards according to our works at that time of the judgment seat of Christ. Some Christians will be given wood and hay and stubble, while others get gold, silver, and precious stones. And then it says that they will be tested by fire. Well, the wood, the hay, and the stubble will all burn up and not be there. Some will still have the gold and the silver and the precious stones. Some spend a lifetime in the church doing good work, but they do it for the wrong reason. They will lose their reward. They will not lose their salvation, but they'll lose their reward on that day and be disappointed. I'll talk more later what that might be too, but this judgment, the judgment seat of Christ, is for believers only. It's not the same as the final great white throne judgment here at the end of time. That's something else, as talked about in Revelation 20. We'll talk about that in the coming lesson. But then, following the judgment seat of Christ, comes that marriage supper of the Lamb that we talk about. And that will be going on. We'll be with Christ at the marriage supper of the Lamb, apparently for that 140 days, while the wrath of God is going on the earth below, while it's being poured out upon the earth. So that's how it's starting to play out. And we'll talk more about some of the details that we mentioned today next time. Same bat channel, same bat station. Lights out, everybody. In the name of Jesus, amen.